Imagine you're out in the wilderness, far away from civilization, where the only sounds you hear are the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds echoing in the vast open air. It's a feeling of freedom, a place where you can get away from it all and connect with nature. For one woman, this peaceful solitude turned into something far more chilling, something that still leaves us with more questions than answers, even years after the incident. 3 years ago, a woman set out on a solo hiking adventure into one of the most treacherous canyons in the country. Little did she know, her decision would lead to an unsolved mystery that would baffle authorities, her family, and even the most experienced hikers. She walked into that canyon alone, leaving behind only a few personal belongings and her GPS watch. What happened to her after that? Was it an accident? Or was there something more sinister at play? The question that haunts everyone involved is simple, yet profound. What happened to her? As the years passed without any trace of her, the search slowly dwindled, and hopes began to fade. It wasn't until 3 years later, when something extraordinary happened, that the case took a completely unexpected turn. The woman's GPS watch, which had been thought to have stopped working, suddenly uploaded a final location, a location that would leave everyone stunned. What was she doing there? Was it a sign of something much darker? And why, after all this time, did her watch send out its last signal now? It's these questions that have kept everyone on edge, waiting for answers. But what if I told you the story behind this woman's disappearance is far more complicated and far more chilling than anyone ever expected? You might be wondering, why should you care about this woman's story? What does it mean to you? Well, let me tell you, it's not just her story, it's our story. It could have been any of us out there, on that trail, facing the unknown. We all think we're prepared, but sometimes things happen that we just can't explain. This woman, like so many others, believed she was just going on a peaceful hike to escape the chaos of everyday life. But what she didn't know was that the wilderness can be as unpredictable as it is beautiful. This is a story about vulnerability, trust, and the chilling reality of how quickly things can go wrong when we step out of our comfort zones. You might think it's just another story about a missing hiker, but it's not. There's something far deeper at play here, and you're about to find out what that is. Now, I know you're probably wondering what's going to happen next. You've clicked on this video because you want to know the answers. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll get them. But you're not just going to get the answers handed to you easily. We're going to dive into this mystery together, step by step. We'll explore the timeline of events, the clues that were left behind, and the chilling discoveries made in the wake of her disappearance. But more importantly, we'll ask the hard questions that no one has dared to answer. Why did her GPS upload a final location after 3 years? What does it mean for us? And what does it say about the world we live in? Trust me, the answers will surprise you. But before we dive into those details, let's take a moment to really think about this. Picture yourself in her shoes, standing at the edge of that canyon, looking out over the vast expanse of rock and sky. You're alone, but you're not worried. You've prepared for this. You've done your research, you've packed your gear, and you know the trail well. But there's something in the air, something that's hard to put your finger on. It's a feeling that nags at the back of your mind, like you've forgotten something important. And yet, you continue on because that's what you do. You push forward. You walk deeper into the canyon, knowing the path may get rough, but you're ready for whatever comes your way. You've always been in control until the moment you're not. That moment is when things take a dark turn. The trail you're on isn't as familiar as it once seemed. You're starting to feel like something's wrong, but you don't know what. Maybe it's the changing weather or the sudden silence that surrounds you, but you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched. Your heart races, but you keep moving, pushing through the unease. But something's different this time. Something feels off in a way you can't explain. What happens next will send chills down your spine. Now, imagine a few years pass and the world moves on. The search for this woman, once full of hope, gradually fades into the background. But then, her GPS watch uploads a final location, a location that no one expected, and one that raises more questions than answers. The question is, why now? Why after all this time? The mystery of her disappearance isn't just a cold case. It's a puzzle that continues to haunt everyone who's ever come across it. This woman's fate is tied to the unknown, an unknown that we may never fully understand. But we're going to try. Together. As we continue on, I want you to keep thinking about that moment when she walked into the canyon, unaware of what lay ahead. Think about the implications of the GPS upload. What did it mean? Was it a message? A warning? Or something else entirely? This is where the story takes an unexpected twist, and where we, as viewers, are left to piece together the clues. What happened in that canyon? What does the final location reveal about her fate? And more importantly, why is this story one that we can't afford to forget? By the end of this journey, you'll have the answers you've been searching for. But I'm warning you, the truth might be even more unsettling than you expect. Keep watching, because what comes next will make you look at the wilderness and the world around you in a completely different light. Before we dive into the mystery of her final location, let's take a step back and understand the woman at the center of this story. Her name was Clara Thompson, and to anyone who knew her, she was the picture of resilience and independence. A 34-year-old marketing executive with a penchant for adventure, Clara was no stranger to hiking in remote locations. In fact, it was her love of the outdoors that drew her to the canyon in the first place. She'd spent countless weekends hiking lesser-known trails, and those who knew her often referred to her as someone who thrived in nature, someone who embraced the solitude it offered. But even the most seasoned hikers can find themselves in a situation beyond their control, and Clara's story is a chilling reminder that no one is ever truly prepared for what the wild can throw at you. Clara's decision to hike alone into the canyon wasn't out of the ordinary for her. She had done it before, and it was something she always seemed to find solace in, an escape from the demands of work, the noise of the city, and the pressure of maintaining a perfectly curated life on social media. For Clara, the mountains were where she could be herself, where she could think, reflect, and breathe. But this time was different. In the weeks leading up to her hike, those closest to her noticed she was acting strangely. Her friends said she seemed more distant than usual, her responses more curt, and her eyes often appeared hollow, as though she was carrying a weight too heavy for her to bear. There was something off, something people couldn't quite put their finger on. But like many of us do, they brushed it off. Everyone has their moments, right? She'll snap out of it, they thought. No one expected that this would be the beginning of a dark and twisted journey that none of them could have anticipated. Days before she disappeared, Clara had called her brother, Mark, to let him know she was heading out on her solo trip. He had offered to join her, but she insisted on going alone, saying she needed time to clear her head. It wasn't unusual for her to make spontaneous decisions, but Mark had picked up on something in her tone, a subtle hesitation, an undercurrent of uncertainty that made him pause. He remembered telling her to stay safe, but she brushed off his concerns with her usual confidence. "I've done this 100 times, Mark. I'll be fine," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. That was the last time he spoke to her. At first, the search was frantic. Her family, her friends, and local authorities combed through the canyon, desperately looking for any sign of Clara. But as the days turned into weeks and then months, the search slowed to a halt. There was nothing, no tracks, no footprints, no sign of her. All her belongings were accounted for, but the canyon itself seemed to swallow her whole, as if she had vanished into thin air. As far as anyone knew, Clara had simply disappeared, leaving behind only questions and confusion. It didn't help that Clara had been an enigma in some ways. She had always kept her personal life private, even from those closest to her. She didn't talk much about her relationships or the details of her daily life, but what little was known painted a picture of someone who was constantly on the move, always seeking something, but never quite finding it. In the months that followed her disappearance, rumors started to swirl. Some whispered that Clara had met with foul play, that someone had been waiting for her in the canyon, ready to strike. But the authorities found no evidence to support this. No suspicious activity, no signs of forced entry into her life, no strange encounters leading up to her hike. Others believed Clara had simply become overwhelmed by life, that she had taken off to start over somewhere, maybe even gone into hiding. But that theory never sat right with those who knew her well. Clara wasn't the type to abandon everything, to just disappear without a word. She had too much to live for, too many people who cared about her. And yet, despite all the theories, no one could explain her sudden absence. Then, just when it seemed like the case would be relegated to the files of unsolved disappearances, her GPS watch sent out a signal. That one moment brought everything rushing back to the surface: the unanswered questions, the unresolved fears, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. The GPS had been thought to be broken, its data lost along with her. But now, 3 years later, it pinged with one final location, coordinates that pointed to an area deep in the canyon, a spot no one had considered before. It was so far off the beaten path that even the most experienced hikers would have been hesitant to go there. Why did Clara's watch choose this moment, 3 years after her disappearance, to upload its final location? Was it a glitch, or was there something more deliberate behind it? The authorities immediately launched a new search based on the coordinates, but as they arrived at the location, they were met with more confusion. The spot was barren. There was nothing but rocks and dry brush, no signs of Clara, no footprints, no clue as to why the GPS would have chosen it. But there was something else there, something strange. A small, weathered journal was found, partially buried under a pile of rocks. The pages were filled with cryptic notes and observations about the canyon, some of them scribbled hastily as if written in a hurry, others appearing more thoughtful, almost philosophical. The journal contained a single mention of a dark figure, but the context was unclear. Who was this figure? Was it someone Clara had encountered on her hike? Was it a person, or something else entirely? The authorities were baffled, and so were Clara's family and friends. But as they pored over the journal, they began to uncover more details that only raised more questions. One entry stood out, dated just a few days before Clara's disappearance. "The canyon is watching me. I can feel it." What did she mean by that? Was it a metaphor for the isolation she felt, or was there something more ominous at play? The further they dug into the journal, the more it seemed like Clara had been on the verge of uncovering something dark and dangerous. But what? Was it possible that Clara had stumbled upon something she shouldn't have? Maybe someone or something that didn't want to be found. The more they tried to piece it together, the more the mystery deepened, and the more chilling it became. Was Clara's disappearance a tragic accident, or was she caught in something much darker, something far beyond her control? And what about the GPS watch? Why had it uploaded its final signal now, after all this time? The answers may be closer than we think, but as we continue this journey, I promise you, things are going to get even stranger. Just remember, Clara's story isn't over yet, and the deeper we dig, the more unsettling the truth becomes. Stay with me as we unravel this mystery, piece by piece. As the investigation into Clara's disappearance grew more intense, things started to take a turn for the worse. Just when it seemed like they were getting closer to uncovering the truth, the obstacles began to mount. What should have been a breakthrough in the case, the discovery of the journal and the strange reference to a dark figure, soon took on an eerie sense of foreboding. The authorities, along with Clara's family, were determined to get answers, but with every step forward, it felt like someone, or something, was actively working to cover up the truth. The first sign that things were going awry came just days after the journal was found. Clara's brother, Mark, had been working tirelessly to piece together her last known movements, digging through old messages, emails, and notes in an attempt to find any clue that might lead to her whereabouts. But one afternoon, as he sat in his office, reviewing documents related to the case, something strange happened. A key piece of evidence, a map of the canyon, which had been marked with Clara's potential route, vanished. It wasn't misplaced, and it certainly wasn't thrown away. It simply disappeared. Mark searched everywhere, his desk, the drawers, his files, but the map was gone. A few days later, the authorities reported something even more bizarre. The GPS data from Clara's watch had somehow been wiped from their system. It was as if someone didn't want that information to see the light of day. The sense of helplessness began to set in, and with it, a nagging feeling that they were being watched, monitored by forces beyond their understanding. What was even more unsettling, however, was the warning that came a week later. Mark was sitting in a cafe, going through some old photographs of Clara, when a stranger approached him. The man was tall, with dark eyes and a weathered face, as if life had taken a toll on him. He was dressed casually, but there was something about him that seemed off. The man sat down without asking, his gaze lingering on Mark's phone screen for a moment before he spoke. "You need to stop looking," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You'll find things that are better left hidden." Mark didn't know what to make of the encounter. The man didn't introduce himself, nor did he explain how he knew what Mark was working on. But the warning was clear. Someone didn't want this mystery uncovered, and they were willing to go to great lengths to ensure it stayed buried. It wasn't long before Mark started to question everyone around him. Was there someone close to Clara who had something to hide? Or was it possible that the authorities were involved in some way? The more he dug, the more things seemed to spiral out of control. He reached out to Clara's closest friends, trying to find any inconsistencies in her behavior leading up to her disappearance. That's when he uncovered something he hadn't expected. One of her old colleagues, a man named Jared, had been in regular contact with her just days before her hike. Jared was someone Clara had known for years, but their relationship had always been strictly professional. Or at least that's what Mark had thought. As he dug deeper, Mark uncovered a series of private messages between Clara and Jared that suggested their relationship was more complicated than it appeared. The tone of the messages shifted, becoming more personal and even flirtatious in some instances. There was talk of meeting up, discreetly, away from the eyes of the rest of their colleagues. But what caught Mark's attention most was one particular message, sent the day before Clara left for her hike. "Be careful, Clara. There are things in the canyon that no one talks about. Things you don't want to know." Why would Jared, someone Clara had always trusted, warn her like that? Was he trying to protect her, or was there something more sinister at play? Mark's unease grew as he realized that he had never met Jared in person, even though Clara had always spoken highly of him. Could this man have known something about the canyon that no one else did? And could he have been hiding something crucial, something that could explain why Clara disappeared? The more Mark thought about it, the more his suspicions grew. There was something off about Jared, something that didn't add up. As Mark continued to probe into Clara's past, he discovered another shocking detail, a report from a local ranger station that had gone unnoticed until now. The report was filed nearly a year before Clara's disappearance, and it mentioned a series of strange occurrences in the canyon, mysterious sightings, hikers who had reported feeling as though they were being followed, and one particularly unsettling account of a woman who had encountered a shadowy figure deep in the canyon, claiming that it had watched her every move. The ranger who filed the report had noted that this woman's account had been dismissed as a hallucination, but the strange detail of the shadowy figure mirrored the cryptic message Clara had left in her journal. Was it possible that Clara had been in the canyon at the wrong time, stumbling upon something dark and dangerous that she wasn't supposed to see? Just when it seemed like Mark was getting closer to the truth, something even more unexpected happened. He was contacted by an anonymous tipster who claimed to know the truth about Clara's disappearance. The tipster promised to meet him in person, offering to reveal everything in exchange for one simple condition. Mark had to stop asking questions and walk away from the investigation. If he didn't, there would be consequences. Mark, desperate for answers, agreed to the meeting, but when he arrived at the location, an old, abandoned cabin at the edge of the canyon, he found nothing. No one was there. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something on the ground, a small, blood-stained piece of fabric, identical to the jacket Clara had been wearing the day she disappeared. The fabric seemed to have been left intentionally, as if to send a message. But what message? And why had it been left there? Was someone trying to make Mark back off? Or was this a warning that something even darker was at play? The disappearance of Clara Thompson was quickly becoming something far more than just a missing persons case. It was turning into a web of secrets, lies, and betrayals, and it seemed like everyone involved had something to hide. But who could Mark trust? And what would it take to uncover the truth about what really happened to Clara in that canyon? Every lead seemed to raise more questions, and every answer only deepened the mystery. As Mark stood at the edge of the canyon, staring into the vast expanse before him, he realized that the deeper he dug, the more perilous the journey became. There was no turning back now, but was he ready to face the truth, no matter how chilling it might be? As Mark continued to piece together the unsettling puzzle of Clara's disappearance, the case seemed to take an even darker turn. He had always believed that the mystery was about Clara, her hike into the canyon, and the strange events surrounding her final days. But soon, another thread emerged, one that connected him to the investigation in ways he hadn't expected, and it complicated everything even further. Mark's longtime friend, Jessica, who had been helping him with the investigation from the beginning, started receiving strange messages as well. At first, they were harmless, vague, even cryptic statements that didn't seem to mean much. But as the days passed, the messages grew more direct, more threatening. Jessica had been at Clara's side before the hike, and she had been the one to talk to her the night before she left. As Mark sat in his apartment, reviewing the latest piece of evidence, a photo Clara had sent Jessica from the canyon, the phone rang. It was Jessica. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Mark, I got one too," she said, her words rushing out. "A letter just like yours. It's telling me to stop looking." Her breathing grew heavier. "Mark, I don't know what's happening. Who's behind this?" The coincidence was chilling, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was now in the crosshairs of something far more dangerous than just a missing persons case. The fact that Jessica, someone with no direct connection to Clara's hike, was also being targeted left him with more questions than answers. Who was watching them? What was it that they had uncovered that made someone feel threatened enough to silence them? The timing of it all was too precise to be random. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, and they were making it clear that they were not afraid to escalate things further. Things became even more complex when Mark received an anonymous package one afternoon. The contents of the box were simple: a torn piece of a map, the same one Clara had been using before her disappearance, and a set of coordinates scribbled on a piece of paper. But the coordinates weren't just some random location. They pointed to an area deep within the canyon, far beyond where Clara had gone. This was new information. Mark had already combed through Clara's known route, but this map suggested a hidden area, one that no one had been aware of before. Could Clara have stumbled upon this secret location? And if so, what did it mean? As Mark began to consider the implications, his thoughts turned back to Jessica. She had been a central figure in the early days of the investigation, a key witness, and a source of comfort for him. But now, as the threats escalated and more pieces of the puzzle started to emerge, Mark began to question everything about their connection. He remembered the way Jessica had hesitated when asked about Clara's plans before the hike. She had always seemed a bit too distracted, a little too detached from the situation for someone who had been so close to Clara. And now, with the messages, the strange coincidence of receiving a similar warning, and the sudden appearance of the coordinates, Mark couldn't help but wonder. Was she involved in some way? Had she been hiding something? Could her involvement with Clara have gone beyond friendship? That thought gnawed at him, and the more he thought about it, the more paranoid he became. Was Jessica just another victim in all of this? Or had she been keeping something from him all along? The fear that she might be hiding something was enough to make him second-guess everything she had told him. He tried reaching out to her, but she wasn't responding to his calls. Each time he left a message, the same knot of dread tightened in his stomach. What was she hiding? And why was she acting so strange? Just when Mark thought things couldn't get more complicated, a new lead emerged, one that contradicted everything they thought they knew about Clara's last days. A woman came forward, someone who claimed to have been camping in the same canyon around the same time Clara had gone missing. She described seeing a woman matching Clara's description, but what she said next sent chills down Mark's spine. According to the woman, Clara had been talking to someone that day, someone who wasn't on any of the official records. A man, she said, who had been following Clara since she entered the canyon, someone who had acted strangely toward her. The witness didn't know who the man was, but she did remember one specific detail. He had been wearing a jacket similar to the one Mark had seen in photographs of Clara, only it was torn, with a strange symbol stitched on the sleeve. It was as if the mystery was tightening its grip around him, each new piece of information only leading to more questions. Who was this man? How was he connected to Clara, or to the unknown forces that seemed determined to stop anyone from uncovering the truth? As if that wasn't enough, Mark received a disturbing phone call that same evening, a call that was nearly identical to the one Jessica had received. "You're too close to the truth," the voice on the other end said, the tone cold and menacing. "If you keep going, there will be consequences. It's not just Clara's life at stake anymore. It's yours, too." The line went dead before Mark could respond, but the message was clear. Someone was willing to do whatever it took to keep him from getting any closer to the truth. The sense of danger was no longer abstract, it was real, and it was closing in on him. Every lead, every new piece of evidence, only seemed to raise the stakes. Mark was no longer just investigating a missing person. He was walking into a labyrinth of lies, betrayals, and secrets that someone would go to extreme lengths to keep hidden. As he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the torn map and the list of coordinates, it became clear to him that this wasn't just about Clara anymore. Something far bigger was at play, something that reached further into the canyon's dark past, something that no one could have anticipated. And with every passing day, Mark was drawn deeper into a world that was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The question remained, who could he trust? And how far would he be willing to go to uncover the truth before it was too late? The walls were closing in, and with every move, he was one step closer to a truth that could shatter everything. But that truth was still out of reach. And someone was watching, waiting for the moment Mark would slip up, and when that happened, they would strike. The twists weren't over yet. The next morning, as Mark sat hunched over the desk, trying to make sense of the new clues, his phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. Hesitating for just a moment, he picked it up, his heart already racing in anticipation. The voice on the other end was distorted, but its tone was unmistakably cold, cruel even. "You should stop now, Mark. Before it's too late." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. It was the same voice from the night before, the one that had warned him to back off. But this time it was different. There was something more final about it, as if a line had been crossed, a point of no return. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he felt a wave of dread rush over him. As the minutes ticked by, he sat there in stunned silence, staring at the phone, struggling to make sense of the conversation. Who were these people? What did they know? And why were they so desperate to keep him from finding out the truth? His mind raced through countless possibilities, each darker than the last. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just an investigation anymore. It wasn't just about Clara, or even Jessica. This had become something far more dangerous, something personal. Someone was hunting him, and it wasn't a matter of finding Clara anymore, it was about keeping him quiet. Mark stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. The apartment felt suffocating, the walls closing in around him. He needed air. He needed to think. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket, snatched up the maps and coordinates, and headed out the door. As he walked to his car, he tried to shake off the fear that was steadily creeping up on him. He wasn't going to back down. He couldn't. Not after everything he'd uncovered. But when he reached the parking lot, his heart sank. His car was gone. Just like that. His keys, which he had left on the counter inside his apartment, now seemed like a cruel reminder of the danger that was steadily closing in on him. His stomach churned. Who had taken it? And why? Was this just another warning? Or something far worse? 1,000 thoughts spun in his head, each more terrifying than the last. Desperate, he called Jessica, hoping to hear her voice and find some sense of stability in the chaos. But once again, her phone went straight to voicemail. Frustration and fear bubbled up inside him. It was as if she had vanished off the face of the earth. He tried calling her again, then again, but each time, the same robotic voice answered. It was no use. She wasn't responding, and in his gut, Mark felt the distinct, growing terror that he was losing control of the situation. Jessica had been his anchor through all of this, the one person who believed him, who was invested in finding the truth. But now, she was unreachable. Panic began to set in as Mark's thoughts swirled. What was happening? Where was she? The silence that followed the phone calls felt deafening. Then, a single, unexpected thought pierced through the fog of his growing paranoia. What if Jessica wasn't on it? What if she had been the one to take the car, to lead him into this trap all along? It didn't make sense, he told himself. She had been his ally. But the more he thought about it, the more doubt seeped in. Maybe she had been keeping secrets. Maybe she knew more than she was letting on. Maybe she was involved in whatever dark forces were behind Clara's disappearance. As Mark paced in circles, he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. The same black SUV that had been tailing him for the last few days was parked across the street. He hadn't noticed it before, but now, as he stood there frozen, it was impossible to ignore. He knew it was them, the people behind the threats. They had been following him, watching his every move, waiting for the right moment to strike.
But why?
And what did they want from him? He felt the weight of their eyes on him, even though he couldn't see them. It was then that he realized the full extent of the danger he was in. They weren't just watching him. They were controlling the narrative, pulling the strings. The clues, the warnings, the strange coincidences, it was all part of a much bigger plan. And Mark was caught in the middle of it, a pawn in a game he didn't understand. Desperation clawed at him. His mind was racing, his breath shallow, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Mark wasn't sure what to do next. Should he confront them? Should he try to find Jessica and demand answers? Or should he run, get as far away from the mess he had stumbled into as possible? But even as he entertained these thoughts, a part of him knew it was too late for that. Running wouldn't solve anything. Not now. The game had already begun, and there was no turning back. Mark tried one more time to reach Jessica, but when he heard the beep of voicemail again, something inside him snapped. He grabbed his things and started walking down the street, past the parked SUV, trying to keep his cool as he moved swiftly but purposefully. With each step, the tension in the air seemed to grow thicker. The world felt wrong, like a game he hadn't signed up for, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Just as he reached the corner of the block, he stopped dead in his tracks. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Without looking at the screen, he knew who it was. He answered, his heart pounding. "Mark, we have to talk." Jessica's voice was unrecognizable, strained. "I'm not safe. None of us are." Before he could ask her what she meant, she added, her voice trembling. "They're after me, too. They know everything, Mark. You need to leave.
Now."
The call abruptly cut off. Mark's mind went into overdrive. He was no longer just dealing with an investigation. He was in the middle of something far bigger, something dangerous, and someone had just made it very clear that they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. The game was no longer just a mystery to solve, it was a fight for survival. And Mark had no idea who to trust anymore. Mark barely slept that night, his thoughts a tangled mess of suspicion, fear, and desperation. He replayed Jessica's panicked voice in his mind over and over, trying to decipher her words, her tone, anything that might clue him in to what she wasn't saying. When morning finally came, he drove to the only place he thought she might go, her late father's old cabin in the mountains, a remote and rarely visited place she had once mentioned during one of their long late-night talks. It was hours away, hidden deep in the foothills where GPS signals faded and cell reception became unreliable. But something told him that if she was running, that's where she'd be. The silence of the road and the eerie stillness of the trees lining the narrow path only added to the growing sense of dread curling in his stomach. When he finally pulled up to the weather-worn structure, the front door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind like a scene straight out of a horror movie. The moment he stepped inside, Mark could feel it. He wasn't alone. The living room was cold, the fireplace dark, but there were clear signs someone had been there recently. A backpack rested near the couch. A half-empty water bottle sat on the table. A cell phone charger trailed off the wall, like a lifeline waiting to be plugged in. And then he saw her. Jessica stepped out from the hallway slowly, eyes wide, her face pale and drawn like she hadn't slept in days. But it wasn't relief that washed over her when she saw him. It was fear. Raw, unmistakable fear. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark stared at her, confused, heart pounding. "What are you talking about?"
You called me.
"You said you were in danger." But she didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him toward the couch, clutching something tightly in her hand. It was Clara's GPS watch. The same one that had uploaded its location signal 3 years after she vanished. The one that had started this entire nightmare. Mark froze. "Where did you get that?" Jessica looked at him, her expression twisted in a mixture of guilt and pain. "It never went missing," she said quietly. "Clara gave it to me the day before she left. She asked me to hold on to it, told me not to tell anyone. Not even you." Mark's breath caught in his throat. His mind couldn't catch up.
Why?
Why would she do that? Jessica turned away, her shoulders shaking slightly, as if she couldn't bear the weight of what she was about to confess. "Because she didn't disappear, Mark. She ran." Everything fell silent. The wind outside, the creaking of the house, even the buzzing in Mark's ears. It all stopped as her words echoed inside him. "She faked it?" he asked, barely able to form the words. Jessica nodded slowly. She was scared. Of something or someone. She thought they were after her. She didn't trust anyone. Not even the authorities. She planned everything, left behind just enough to make it look like an accident. But she wanted the GPS to be found later, just in case. A breadcrumb. A way to let me know she was okay. Mark stepped back, dizzy from the shock. Everything he thought he knew, every sleepless night he had spent chasing shadows, it all came crashing down. Clara wasn't a victim. She was a fugitive. A runaway. But from what? Or from who? And why had Jessica never said anything? "Because I was afraid," she said, reading his expression. "Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of who might come after me if they knew I still had the watch. Afraid you'd hate me for lying." Mark sat down hard on the arm of the couch, trying to process it all. He had built his entire search around a lie. But before he could gather his thoughts, another realization struck him like lightning. If Clara had planned her disappearance, then why did the GPS suddenly upload after 3 years?
Why now?
Jessica stared at him, her eyes wide. "I didn't turn it on, Mark. I didn't upload anything. Someone else did." The door slammed shut behind them, and both of them jumped. The cabin's front lock clicked into place. Someone was outside. Mark lunged for the window, peering out between the warped curtains. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, motionless, watching. He couldn't make out a face, only the outline of someone tall, wearing dark clothing and holding what looked like a device in their hand. And just like that, the pieces started falling into place. Clara may have run, but someone had always known where she was. And now they were making sure no one else would find her. Or maybe she was never running from someone at all. Maybe she was hiding something she had done. Jessica clutched his arm, trembling.
"There's more, Mark."
"A lot more." Her voice cracked. "But you need to know something else. I wasn't the only one she left something with. There was someone else. Someone who helped her. Someone who's been watching both of us." Mark turned to her, eyes burning with questions.
"Who?"
And that's when the cabin phone rang, an old landline nobody ever used. Slowly, Mark picked it up. There was no voice on the other end. Just a low, rhythmic tapping. Then a whisper so faint, he could barely make it out. "She's not who you think she is, and neither are you." And suddenly, everything Mark thought he knew about Clara, about Jessica, even about himself, was shattered. Mark didn't speak for several seconds. The whisper on the other end of the line was still echoing in his ear, haunting and precise. "She's not who you think she is, and neither are you." He set the receiver down with trembling fingers and turned slowly toward Jessica, his eyes narrowing as 1,000 unspoken questions clawed their way to the surface. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but what made it worse wasn't the voice or the cryptic message. It was Jessica's face. She wasn't surprised. Not even a little. Her eyes darted to the window, to the door, back to the phone, like she'd been waiting for that call, dreading it, but not because it was unexpected. It was because she knew exactly what it meant. Mark stepped closer. "What are you telling me?" he asked, the words thick with disbelief. "You said Clara gave you the GPS. That she ran because she was afraid. But now someone's watching us. Someone knows things about me, about us. What is going on?" Jessica looked down, visibly struggling with herself. She walked across the creaky floor and pulled open a drawer in the old wooden sideboard. From it, she retrieved a worn envelope, faded and water-damaged, and handed it to him without saying a word. Mark opened it carefully, the paper inside torn and fragile, written in Clara's unmistakable handwriting. But what he read made his blood run cold. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a warning. Clara had uncovered something she called the Canyon Ledger, a network of transactions and hidden names tied to land deals, fake hiking permits, and missing women. She believed someone had been using the canyon as a cover-up site, and she'd gotten too close to exposing them. The final line was scribbled hastily in the margin, and it didn't feel like a farewell. It felt like a cry for help. "If something happens to me, don't trust anyone. Not even the ones you love. Especially them." Mark's hands shook as he lowered the paper. Jessica's voice broke the silence. "She gave that to me the same day she handed over the watch. Told me to hide it, never show it to anyone unless I knew she wasn't coming back." Mark stared at her. "And you never thought to say any of this earlier?" She flinched. "I was trying to protect her. And maybe I was protecting myself too. Because if what she wrote is true, Mark, it goes way deeper than we thought. And if we go to the cops, it won't just be her life on the line." He stepped back, overwhelmed. His brain couldn't keep up with the revelations slamming into him like a freight train. His dead ex-girlfriend may have uncovered a dangerous conspiracy. His current girlfriend had kept it secret for 3 years. And some entity, was now watching their every move, waiting warning. As he stood there, trying to process everything, his phone buzzed. A blocked number. He answered it on instinct, and a synthetic voice immediately began speaking in clipped, mechanical tones. "Mr. Callahan, you have one chance to walk away. Forget what you've seen. Destroy the envelope. The canyon takes care of its secrets. You won't get another warning." Then the call cut off. He dropped the phone, the chill in his spine turning to ice. Jessica looked just as pale. "We have to make a choice," she said, her voice barely audible. "We either bury this and try to disappear before it's too late, or we go after the truth and risk everything." It wasn't just a dramatic ultimatum, it was real, tangible. The weight of it pressed down on Mark's chest like a boulder. If he chose silence, he'd have to live with the knowledge that something sinister was still happening in that canyon, that Clara may have died alone, terrified, with the truth buried alongside her. But if he chose to keep digging, to expose the ledger, the threats, the network that may have orchestrated her vanishing, he'd be putting not just himself, but Jessica and anyone else close to him in grave danger. The worst part? He wasn't even sure anymore who he could trust. The voice on the phone wasn't lying. Clara's message had said not to trust the ones you love. And yet, who else did he have? As he stared at Jessica, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold in a lifetime of secrets, he knew he had to decide, and fast. They needed allies, but every person they contacted could be the one who betrayed Clara. Every whisper could be a trap. Every step forward might lead them further into a maze of deception and death. Then, out of nowhere, his phone buzzed again, this time with a location pin. Just coordinates. No message. But the place it pointed to was unmistakable. The northern ridge of the canyon, where no trails led, where rescue teams had once stopped looking, where no GPS signal should have ever been found. And pinned to that location, sent from an encrypted account, were 3 words that shook him to the core. "She's still alive." And just like that, the whole game changed. Again. Mark stood motionless in the doorway of the abandoned ranger station, the desert sun casting sharp lines through the broken window panes. Jessica was a few steps behind him, clutching a half-charged satellite phone they'd managed to recover from a fireproof safe she somehow knew existed. Every instinct in Mark's body screamed that they were standing too close to something they couldn't possibly understand, but it was already too late to walk away. Because inside that dusty, forgotten room, beneath stacks of old hiking logs and ranger manuals, was a hidden compartment they hadn't expected. Not just files on Clara, but on at least 16 other people who had vanished in the same canyon over the last decade. Names, coordinates, even personal effects. Clara hadn't been an isolated case. She was just the one who got too close. And if that GPS ping was real, if she was somehow still alive, they weren't chasing just a rescue anymore. They were about to blow the lid off something built to stay buried. Mark rifled through the documents, and one name stopped him cold. Thomas Callahan.
His own father.
Jessica gasped. That can't be, but the papers didn't lie. A transfer of ownership document for a remote section of the canyon, purchased in cash under a shell company, signed by a Thomas Callahan from Prescott, Arizona. His dad had always told him he worked for a land development firm in the 90s, but Mark had never known details, and now he wondered if that was by design. Was this why his father had gone off the grid years ago, disappearing without a word? Did he know what was happening out here? Or worse, was he part of it? Suddenly, the sound of tires crunching gravel outside jolted them to attention. Jessica pulled Mark down behind the desk, the satellite phone clattering to the floor. Through a crack in the wall, they watched a black SUV roll to a stop. Out stepped a woman in a clean-pressed U.S. Forest Service uniform that didn't match the dusty, outdated gear around her. She moved with precision, scanning the area like she'd been here before. In her hand, she held a familiar object, Clara's GPS watch. The very one Mark had believed he'd recovered from Jessica's apartment days ago. Mark's stomach dropped. That's impossible. You had the watch. Jessica's face turned pale. I thought I did. It looked identical. And just then, the final piece began to crack into place. They hadn't been playing detective. They'd been steered, manipulated. Someone wanted them to find the ranger station, to uncover the files, but not to expose the truth, to scare them into silence. Because whoever this woman was, she wasn't here to help. She was here to erase everything. Evidence, questions, witnesses. They crawled out a back window and fled down a narrow wash. But Mark's mind was racing faster than his feet. If the government was involved, or at least some rogue piece of it, then who else was in on it? And more importantly, who had tipped them off about the station? That's when it hit him like a brick to the chest. The satellite phone. Jessica hadn't found it. She'd known exactly where it was. And when he turned to confront her, the guilt in her eyes was already there. You knew this wasn't just about Clara, he said, panting. You knew about my dad. That's why you brought me here. Her silence said everything. You used me. He staggered back. All this time, this whole trip, was a setup? Jessica's voice cracked, but it was clear. I didn't know how deep it went. Not until we got here. But yes, I knew you had a connection. I knew they'd watch you. And if you went looking, they'd come out of hiding. That's how we find her. That's how we end this. Mark reeled. The betrayal twisted in his chest, hot and raw. She'd used his grief, his hope. But part of him also knew, without her, he never would have gotten this far. Still, it didn't change the fact that nothing around him could be trusted anymore. Every step forward was into a deeper lie. Every clue had strings attached. And now, they were both running for their lives, pursued by people who had the power to make them disappear without a trace. As the canyon narrowed and the sun began to set behind the rocky ridges, Mark looked ahead and saw something, a glint, a reflection in the shadows. A trail cam, hidden in the brush, its lens cracked, but still blinking. It was pointed at a narrow path he didn't recognize, one that wasn't on any map. That's it, he whispered. That's where she went. Jessica hesitated. Or, it's where they want us to go. Either way, the decision was made. Mark stepped forward. And just as he crossed into the canyon shadow, his phone buzzed again. One new video. Sent anonymously. It was night vision footage. A woman, Tied up, dirty, weak, but alive. Clara. Her mouth was gagged, but her eyes were wide open, staring into the camera. Behind her, voices echoed. And a familiar one said clearly, "You brought him here, just like we planned." The screen went black, and Mark realized they weren't chasing answers anymore. They were walking straight into a trap. Mark stood at the mouth of the hidden canyon trail, his chest heaving, eyes locked on the entrance to what looked like an old mining tunnel carved into the rock. The night had dropped fast, desert winds whipping around him, dust biting at his skin. The silence was sharp, too sharp. No birds. No rustle. Just the quiet hum of his thoughts unraveling as every piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jessica stood beside him, bruised and shaken, her loyalty still a coin toss in his mind. But right now, she wasn't the threat. Whatever waited inside that tunnel was. The video of Clara, her face pale, mouth gagged, eyes screaming, was still burned into his brain. That wasn't old footage. That wasn't staged. It was real, and it had been sent as both a threat and an invitation. Someone inside that tunnel wanted him to find them, and they were confident enough to assume he wouldn't make it out. As they stepped into the darkness, the temperature dropped sharply. The stale air smelled of mildew and burnt plastic. Mark clicked on the flashlight strapped to his chest and scanned the walls. Wires. Cables. Security cameras tucked into corners, some blinking red, others dead. "This place is rigged," he muttered. Jessica didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on a faded logo painted along one of the walls. ArcLight, Environmental Survey Division. It was a fake company his father used to mention casually over dinner, always in the past tense, always when drunk. Mark had never thought much of it. But now, staring at the underground bunker it led to, he understood. His father hadn't been an engineer. He'd been part of something else. Something that didn't just monitor the land, but protected what hid beneath it. They moved deeper into the corridor, following the faint hum of machinery. At the end of the tunnel was a steel door slightly ajar, a yellow flickering light seeping through the crack. Mark pushed it open slowly and froze. The room beyond was a command center, old but functional, covered in screens, maps, and files stacked in chaotic heaps. And there, standing in front of a wall of monitors, was the woman from the SUV. Her name tag read Evans. But it was the man beside her that made Mark's blood run cold. Thomas Callahan, his father. The older man turned slowly, not surprised, not even angry, just tired. "You finally made it," he said, his voice hoarse. "I hoped you wouldn't." Mark's throat dried. "You're alive?" "Barely," Thomas muttered. "And so is she." He pointed toward a cell door on the far side of the room. "Clara's in there. You can see her. But after that, I need you to leave. You don't understand what's happening here." But Mark stepped forward, rage flaring. "You lied to me. You disappeared. You watched her vanish. And now you're standing here like you're the victim?" Evans raised her hand slightly, fingers brushing the sidearm at her hip. "Let him speak," she warned. "He has a right to know before this ends." Thomas nodded. This place was never about land surveys. It was a data trap, a net for signals, anomalies, anything out of place in this region. Clara, she found something she wasn't supposed to. Not a crime. Not a person. A transmission. Something buried deep in this canyon that predates any of us. She followed it. Tracked it. We tried to stop her. But she got close. Too close. And she triggered it. Jessica whispered. "What transmission?" Thomas walked to the console and hit a button. A distorted, rhythmic signal filled the room. Alien. Low frequency. Not words, just pulses. It comes every 27 years. Like clockwork. From beneath this rock. We don't know what it means. We just know when people hear it, they change. They become obsessed. Clara couldn't let it go. So we had to isolate her. Not for punishment. For containment. Mark shook his head in disbelief. "You imprisoned her because she listened to a sound?" Thomas's expression didn't change. "Because she wouldn't stop. Because people started dying. And if she shared it, it would spread. And we can't risk that again." The room fell into stunned silence. And then Mark made his choice. He ran for the cell, opened the door, and found Clara alive, barely. Eyes sunken but lucid. "Mark," she whispered. "It's real. Everything. It wants out." Before he could speak, gunfire erupted behind them. Jessica had drawn a weapon from her jacket and aimed it square at Evans. "You lied to me too," she said coldly. "You promised you'd release her." Chaos exploded. Thomas lunged at Evans. Mark shielded Clara. Alarms blared as the base's security was triggered. In the commotion, Jessica grabbed a drive from the console, the source of the signal files, and tossed it to Mark. "Run." They escaped into the tunnel as the facility went into lockdown. Behind them, explosions rippled through the bunker, self-destruct protocols erasing decades of secrets. Jessica never made it out. Neither did Thomas. But Clara did. And as they climbed out of the canyon into the cold morning light, Mark looked down at the drive in his hand. It was warm, humming faintly,
Still pulsing.
Weeks later, in a cabin miles from the nearest road, Mark sat alone with a laptop. Clara had vanished again, this time on her terms. The footage, the files, the GPS pings, he had it all. And yet, every time he pressed play on the signal, he felt something shift in him. An obsession creeping in. A need to understand. To listen deeper. And one night, unable to resist, he uploaded the Pulse online. Just a clip. Just a minute. Just to see. And within 24 hours, 2 more people had gone missing. Months had passed since the canyon imploded, swallowing the ArcLight facility and everything it held like it was never there. News reports called it a geological anomaly, and the government swiftly fenced off the entire area under the guise of environmental protection. Nothing made headlines, no names were mentioned, and no bodies were recovered, just as planned. Mark had since retreated to the kind of quiet town that didn't ask questions, renting a tiny house perched at the edge of an old apple orchard in upstate New York. He lived off the grid now, paycheck by paycheck, freelance coding gigs just enough to survive, and most days spent trying to forget. But forgetting wasn't simple. Not when the drive sat hidden in the floorboards beneath his bed. Not when the signal still echoed in his dreams like a ghostly metronome keeping time with the beat of something other. Clara hadn't resurfaced since she left the morning after the escape. No goodbye, just a note scribbled on the back of an old Polaroid. "It's not over. We were only the start." Mark knew she meant the transmission. It had left a mark on them, one that didn't fade no matter how far they ran. He often found himself wondering if she was out there trying to track it again, maybe in another place, another signal pulsing through another frequency. But deep down, he knew she wasn't looking anymore. She was hiding. The kind of hiding that comes after realizing the truth is too big for any one person to bear. Still, the internet never stopped talking. Reddit threads popped up with people claiming to hear the same frequency in isolated forests or remote deserts, while TikTok videos stitched together strange footage of static-filled radios and blinking lights over power lines. Most viewers laughed it off as ARG content or viral marketing, but a few looked closer and they started connecting dots. ArcLight logos barely visible in old survey footage, satellite images showing scorch marks near so-called abandoned stations, missing persons reports that never made local news. One YouTube channel, Echo Theory, had even started decoding the pulse publicly. Their last upload showed a waveform forming a pattern that looked eerily like coordinates that pointed to a stretch of forest in Maine. Mark watched the video twice, his heart pounding. He knew those woods. His father once took him camping there. They called it dead zone territory. No signal, no wildlife. Just quiet. He wanted to ignore it. He tried to close the laptop and leave the video buried in his watch history, but it didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a summons. So, one night, after weeks of pretending to be normal, he went into the orchard and dug up the drive. As he held it under the moonlight, he felt the old pull again, the compulsion, the itch to listen, to understand. He thought of Jessica, her last words before the explosion. Of his father, standing between loyalty and madness. Of Clara, determined to unravel something humanity was never meant to touch. And of himself, caught between letting go and leaning in. But this time, Mark didn't power it on. He didn't upload anything. He placed the drive in a fireproof lockbox, threw it into a backpack, and made the long drive north. As he stood at the edge of that dark forest, dew coating the leaves, wind still, and air humming with silence, he didn't step forward. He buried the box at the base of a cedar tree, marked the spot with 3 stones, and turned away. Some things didn't need to be found. Some truths didn't need decoding. And yet, as he reached the tree line, his phone buzzed for the first time in days. A notification. No number. No app. Just a message. It's awake again. He stared at it, pulse rising, eyes scanning the stillness around him. Somewhere far away, a radio clicked on by itself. Somewhere, another signal began to pulse. He didn't go back. But he didn't sleep that night either. The truth was out there now, not locked in tunnels or hidden on hard drives. It was listening. And maybe it was learning.